Perhaps minor among its other distinctions is the fact that it was the only American aircraft of World War II to be named after an individual. Within days of the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, President Franklin Roosevelt convened an urgent conference with the Joint Chiefs of Staff to plan America's response. The president was deeply concerned with the nation's morale after the devastating Japanese carrier airstrike. He instructed his senior officers that mainland Japan must be bombed as soon as possible. He believed this bold move would not only boost the country's spirits, but also increase voluntary enlistments and strengthen alliances. The president, who was preoccupied with the state of American morale in the aftermath of the perilous Japanese carrier airstrike, instructed his senior officers that mainland Japan must be bombed as soon as feasible. He believed that this would enhance the nation's morale, increase the number of voluntary enlistments, and strengthen war alliances. The Doolittle Raid, led by the renowned aviator and engineer James Doolittle, was the outcome of his order. Doolittle later stated in his autobiography, an attack on the Japanese homeland would cause confusion in the minds of the Japanese people, and sow doubt about the reliability of their leaders. Americans were in dire need of a morale boost, and the operation carried out on April 18, 1942, was a resounding success. The hero of the hour was the B-25 Mitchell, a newly modified medium bomber. The B-25 was officially nicknamed the Mitchell after production had already commenced. The plane was named in honor of General Billy Mitchell, a visionary Army Air Corps general. He had long predicted that the outcome of future conflicts would depend on air power. Mitchell served in World War I. Despite facing significant opposition from both the Army and the Navy, he successfully sank a captured German battleship by attacking it from a primitive biplane, thereby demonstrating the potential of air power. Mitchell's career was ultimately terminated due to his stubborn advocacy for air power and his vision, which were at odds with the prevailing sentiments of the service commanders. Furthermore, the Army and Navy were aligned against him. The Army Air Corps was frequently restricted to mercy flights, dropping food parcels and delivering mail due to financial constraints between the conflicts. Other powers were beginning to recognize the effectiveness of air power as a means to an end by the mid-30s. In 1935, Mussolini's weapons were employed against Ethiopia, with overwhelming results after Italy had employed bombers with devastating effect over Spain. The Italian aircraft's impact on Ethiopia's primitive resources was devastating. And despite Haile Selassie's appeals to the League of Nations, the other powers did nothing. The emperor had been compelled to flee his country in 1936, and the League was doomed to its demise. The United States experienced a few tremors as a result of the changing of the world. Perhaps most significantly, graduates from West Point received their first formal training in aerial combat that year. North American Aviation established a new factory in Los Angeles in 1936, at which time they also committed to aircraft production. At the time, their product, such as this observation plane, was characterized by sophisticated designs that featured undercarriage and other relatively advanced features. In the form of their series of single-engine basic trainers, which were employed in a variety of duties by the armed forces of various countries, they achieved even greater success. The aircraft that was both ingenious and versatile was to establish a reputation for being both exceptionally well-built and well-designed. The organization of the manufacturing process was noteworthy in its own right. The company's initial failure was the design of a twin-engined, long-range bomber. The Air Force had initially ordered 5 B-21s. However, only one was ever manufactured. Although the B-21 was equipped with sophisticated technology, including automated gun turrets, the aircraft's performance was subpar. Nevertheless, it provided North American aviation with an exceptional opportunity to investigate the genuine requirements of bomber design. It also enabled them to demonstrate their active participation in the field and to begin to understand the relatively novel form of aerial warfare and the underlying philosophy, such as the concept of the independent defense of bombers by equipping them with multiple rapid-fire machine guns. Undeterred by the B-21's failure, LA continued to create an alternative design and with its own funds manufactured the NA-40. This model advanced the level of sophistication by incorporating a tricycle undercarriage, which allowed for high-speed landings. This is a wind tunnel-tested model of the NA-40. The now famous twin fins and rudders were implemented to enhance the model's directional stability. In the end, the design was deemed to be significantly superior to its predecessor. However, additional enhancements were anticipated. By the end of 1939, the world had taken additional steps toward disaster as Europe was engulfed in a new war, highlighted by the German demonstration of the paramount significance of aircraft. As worried planners across the Atlantic reflected on Mitchell's prophecies, the NA-40 was among the designs that were rushed into emergency development. The wing was to be lowered, and the fuselage was to be widened. Even with these necessary modifications, the design was sufficiently well received to warrant orders for 178 units of the new aircraft. The initial fuselage was designated for weight testing. After its primary support was removed, the design's resilience under duress was evaluated by placing additional weight around the structure to identify any vulnerabilities that could jeopardize the aircraft during combat. Thousands of pounds of lead ingots were placed within, suspended from, and fixed around the aluminum frame. The design may be unable to withstand the pressures that the widened body would be able to bear, as it would be carrying heavier loads than were originally intended. The fuselage was found to be adequate, although the panels were undulating under the immense sustained pressure. In another location, precise 1/12th scale replicas of the new design were launched into the water to investigate the shape's behavior during the ditching process. Diverse competencies were implemented at the factory. In this location, pattern designers create a mold for the engine nacelle's upper portion. The funnel, which will propel the new North American design, now known as the B-25, by forcing air into the carburetor of the powerful radial engines, is visible. The production of bomber components commences with the pouring of molten metal. The fuselage is assembled on a jig at the primary fabrication factory, and the aeroplane's form gradually begins to take shape. During the B-25's initial construction, a significant amount of manual labor and hand talents were still employed. By this point in the production process, the planes were the result of the individual skills of the tradesmen, with the majority of fabrication duties being performed manually. In a hive of activity that surrounded the emergence of the new medium bomber, which has now been officially dedicated and given its name, skilled hands and steadfast eyes were combined with pride of trade. The Mitchell was the designation that North American intended to give to its B-25 bomber. The service chiefs would have been reasonably certain that these two would be involved in the conflict before long, as they were shortly embroiled in battle in the United Kingdom. The aircraft's lightweight-to-wind ratio and the overall shape's balance created a package that was incredibly simple to fly, which in turn instilled a high level of confidence and acceptance among the crew. It was evident that North American aviation had a victorious operation. The British forces in Europe initially concluded that the Mitchells were inadequately equipped. As a result, the manufacturers likely implemented new turrets, one of which was located in the lower fuselage and operated via a periscope, likely by the B-21 developments. These supplementary defenses, which were not fitted to all models, were to prove to be highly advantageous, as another chapter in the history of the world was to be written on December 7, 1941. Japan's carrier forces launched an attack on Pearl Harbor, which had catastrophic consequences. The United States was to have its carrier-borne bomber force trained and prepared to attack the Japanese capital in less than 6 months, as it was now involved in the conflict. Multi-engined aircraft operating from a carrier deck were the sole means by which the United States could execute its retaliation. Although numerous designs were considered for the assault, only Mitchell's adaptability permitted it to depart from a confined space and travel the necessary distance. The forgiving nature of the B-25 was stretched to the limit, and a hand-picked team of volunteers had been trained to the point of perfection in short takeoff from land bases. However, the confidence that the mission could be effectively executed had been established by the time the planes and crews boarded the Hornet carrier. The task force approached Japan with caution. However, Japanese fishing vessels observed the ships while they were still distant from the intended takeoff point. The boats were destroyed, but not before they had transmitted radio signals. Consequently, the decision was made to initiate the raid early, with the danger of the carrier's loss being the primary concern. The attack on Tokyo resulted in the loss of several American lives, and all of the aircraft involved were destroyed either by crash landing or submerging in the sea. The raid had 3 significant effects. It demonstrated to the Japanese people that their homeland was not impervious to attack from American forces. It caused the Japanese government to recognize the same message and allocate a significant portion of its military power to the defense of its home shores. And perhaps most importantly, it bolstered United States morale. Doolittle, the raid's leader in every sense of the term, was appropriately awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, and the raid demonstrated the immense courage of the crews that participated. General Hap Arnold, who served as the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, is situated to his left. This is General Arnold once more, as he is observed during a visit to the North American Aviation plant in Los Angeles. He is undoubtedly discussing the delivery of additional B-25s and the changes to the aircraft that were being continuously evaluated while inspecting the factory. Arnold possessed his B-25, which bore a badge on its exterior that identified his rank and position. It was maintained as a means of transportation to facilitate the rapid transportation of the general and his staff to various regions of the country.
Successfully carried out.
The production of this B-25 was of the utmost importance by this point, as it and the other aircraft in the United States inventory were essential for a swift victory. The North American factory at Inglewood, like numerous coastal aircraft plants, was regarded as a primary target for enemy assault. In order to conceal the production lines in anticipation of an attack, sophisticated camouflage was implemented. The netting's shade was a welcome secondary effect in the scorching Californian sun. The Los Angeles factory was further expanded to enhance production, even though a new factory had been built in Kansas City specifically for the production of the B-25. The Hollywood Park Racecourse was even commandeered as part of the Los Angeles initiative. The recreation of horse racing was suspended during the war years, and the vacant grounds of the course were utilized to store components for the B-25's construction. Meanwhile, other areas were occupied by administration offices and sub-assembly workshops. As mass production techniques replaced the initial small-scale production, Inglewood remained the primary facility for North American aviation and underwent a rapid increase in automation. The United States industry employed a significant number of women laborers for the first time, resulting in the production of weapons of war, as a significant portion of the male population was directly engaged in the armed forces. The military's demands increased, the war effort gained momentum, and the Mitchells' daily output expanded in tandem. Within weeks of production, the planes were promptly deployed to bases worldwide, engaged in combat, occasionally destroyed and swept into the conflict. In numerous geysers, the Mitchells were able to reach virtually every theater of World War II. In North Africa, combined Allied forces employed fire to combat Germany's Afrika Korps, providing an early introduction to the weapon. In a persistent bombardment of Axis positions, Mitchells of the Army Air Force flew alongside B-24 Liberators and B-17 Fortresses, which significantly contributed to the eventual evacuation of German forces. As a conventional medium-range bomber, the Mitchells were deployed in this location in much the same manner as they had been designed. In this capacity, it was required to navigate the anti-aircraft fire without deviating while the bomb aimers concentrated on their objectives. The bombers' assistance during the 1942 Operation Torch landings in French North Africa was instrumental in the success of the operation and the subsequent campaign. However, the airmen were required to pay a price. As aircraft became unflyable, they were transferred to the attention of specialized cannibals, who would disassemble the entire aircraft in search of salvageable components. The grafting of otherwise pointless planes was a common occurrence. The aircraft that emerged were a testament to the engineers' inventiveness on the bases. The same level of innovation was demonstrated on the other side of the globe, when groups operating from a base in northern Australia made an unauthorized field modification to conventional B-25s. They enhanced their forward armament by installing additional machine guns in the wings, which were situated just outside of the propeller arc. With their frontline experience, these men had identified an alternative function for the Mitchell, disregarding its purported designation as a conventional bomber and employing it as a low-level ground attack weapon. The engineers at Inglewood were swiftly informed of the success of these early flight modifications. Despite their initial apprehension regarding the potential damage to the wings, they prohibited the practice from continuing. However, they promptly began their investigation of the concept at the factory. 2 additional .50 caliber machine guns were initially employed in experiments which were situated on the exterior of the fuselage, adjacent to the pilot. The plane's firepower was instantaneously enhanced. However, the weight of the installation and the impact of the guns, which were situated near the cockpit, raised concerns. The impact of the discharge on the thin aluminum surface, which is situated inches from the pilot's seat, is visible with a close examination. In order to mitigate this, the design was supplemented with robust plates. The Mitchell was equipped with an additional 4 .50 caliber machine guns in the nose, which resulted in a greater forward armament than that of numerous fighters. The manufacturer's experiments and the necessity for a versatile weapons platform led to the development of a plane that was significantly different from the original concept. The Inglewood plant soon began producing the solid nose variant, which had a slender profile and did not advertise the unique devastation it contained.
The Mitchells were employed as a conventional engineering. In this role, it had to run the gauntlet of anti-aircraft fire without deviation, with the bomb aimers focused on their targets.
The plane's success in its new configuration prompted further experiments, leading to even more armament being added to later solid-nose Mitchells. The process of modification was streamlined and refined. In a straightforward and efficient procedure, 2 gun packs are equipped with .50 calibers. This was extended to the aircraft's installations, which facilitated their maintenance in the field, despite the frequently primitive conditions of forward bases. These weapons are both highly effective and readily maintained. The dorsal turret was relocated forward in the later variants, allowing for the addition of 2 .50 caliber weapons to the aircraft's formidable barrage if necessary. The rear of the aircraft was rendered even more vulnerable by the relocation of the dorsal turret, and it was only feasible to execute this maneuver in conjunction with the initial installation of a correct tail gun position on the B-25. Twin 50s are installed in this location, providing the Mitchell with the same level of rear protection as the Boeing Flying Fortress. The ventral turret was never successful due to the periscope's difficulty in operation, and it was subsequently discarded. Single 50s provided side protection, solid-nosed standard. Consequently, the protection of 14 machine guns was deployed by the 25s, and some aircraft were to carry an additional weapon. Numerous Mitchells were equipped with an additional forward-firing armament that was truly extraordinary. A single fixed cannon that fired a 75mm projectile. For many years, this magnificent armament, which was essentially a naval cannon, was the largest gun ever installed on a United States aircraft. It was positioned directly beneath the pilot's seat and had a highly effective damper to dampen the gun's recoil. You can see the size of the cannon shell and picture the effect. The navigator cannoneer was tasked with reloading the cannon one shot at a time using the 21 rounds that were carried. Some airmen swore that the impact of each gun discharge was so powerful that it felt like it momentarily stopped the plane in midair. While a theoretical impossibility, this sensation speaks to the sheer force the crew experienced, and there's no doubt that the shells stopped whatever target they hit. The jolt from the cannon firing on the plane is noticeable. With these improvements, Mitchells from all three services were able to unleash firepower against naval targets with unparalleled ferocity and effectiveness. Traces from the machine guns were utilized to reposition the plane before firing the cannon. Solid-nose Mitchells were so successful that the manufacturer began to design more variations. Here was the kit, which used 850 calibers in a completely self-contained container. Individual commanders were presented with unique options from the manufacturer regarding how they wanted their plane's armaments fitted. The South Pacific was one theater where the additional forward weaponry was heavily deployed. This was the ideal setting for the B-25. The Japanese island strongholds did not require the saturating attention of heavy bombers like the B-17 or B-24, but rather the more surgical precision of the low-flying and selective Mitchell. The precision of the B-25s produced a significant yet cost-effective effect. To the Pacific Islands, either on a premeditated strike or merely patrolling for targets of opportunity. In either case, North America's great medium bomber used its weight in a comparable and telling fashion, sweeping in on its targets from treetop height and expertly exploding them. The B-25's use in maritime patrol, namely in a seek and destroy mission against commerce, was a huge success. The Japanese battled ferociously back, and several Mitchells were killed violently, sometimes by flak or ground fire, and sometimes by the occasional Zero. Although the Mitchell was a powerful fighting machine, its low-level deployment made it an easy target. When information of the Mitchell's losses reached North America, the corporation strengthened its position. These aircraft are coming off the production line with an armored plate under the windscreen, and the section painted yellow is all heavy armor. Production at Inglewood continued as it did at the Kansas City facility, not just for all three United States divisions, but also for Allied air forces such as the Royal Air Force and the Red Air Force. very late model Navy variant and its nearly identical Air Force counterpart are shown side by side in the latter phases of manufacture. Some naval Mitchells were outfitted to handle a single torpedo which was positioned beneath the bomb bay, preventing the doors from entirely closing with it in place. Only once the weapon was released could the fuselage be sealed. Though successful, this had to be a drafty way to go to war. The B-25s would occasionally engage in high-altitude conventionally delivered bombing, despite their limited success with the unpredictable iron bombs of the day. Despite their limited success with the unpredictable iron bombs of the day, the B-25s would occasionally engage in conventionally delivered bombing from a high altitude. Critical to the war effort was the destruction of Japanese shipping. And the successful provision of Allied merchant naval activities, which were critical in the flow of supplies to the battles. Hundreds of thousands of bombs were transported around the world in their containers. Munitions of all types made their way to the front lines and to the bombers that delivered them. Specialist ordnance is loaded into a squadron of B-25s before they take off for raids on the Japanese base at Ramal. These Mitchells, who appear to be C models, set off on one more mission, looking tired and war-weary. The distinctive nose art of many United States squadrons was designed to boost group morale rather than terrify the adversary. However, given the Mitchell's ferocious low-level attack, it is almost certain that part of the livery would have been visible to Japanese troops. The Mitchell was not as large or swift as its counterpart, the B-26 Marauder, but there was little doubt that it was more popular with its crew. Crew of the B-25 found comfort in the plane's responsive maneuverability, toughness capacity to suffer damage and still fly. And if all else else failed, the fact that the jet was simple to get out of in an emergency. This attack will be carried out with parachute bombs, which will slow their descent and allow the low-flying Mitchell to avoid being hit. If you look closely, you can see the effect of skip bombing, in which the bomb bounces off the ground on its route to the target before exploding on the second contact. Again, this provides the bomber time to flee the explosion. Advancing United States troops would see the results of these strikes in the shape of wrecked Japanese aircraft, odd and stark testaments to the effectiveness of the B-25s and other Allied attack planes, even though it had gradually evolved from its original function. The Mitchell remained very much the same plane that had been submitted to the Defense Department before the United States engagement in the war. The North American plant at Inglewood produced its last B-25 in 1944. However, the plant in Kansas City would continue to produce until the conclusion of the war. The California plant was dedicated solely to the production of the P-51 Mustang. And later jet development, which resulted in aircraft such as the F-86 Sabre. These aircraft, the last to leave the California factory, are from a batch of 1,000 H-types. As they make their way down the runway, the last plane to depart is the last one produced at the factory. Named Old Burns, it was covered with autographs and messages from the plane's constructors and factory workers, and it looked rather strange with its graffiti covering. It was deployed to action in India and saw service with the same appearance, the crew never wishing to obscure the efforts of those who developed the plane that would hopefully return them home. Many B-25s survived the war and returned to the United States. Many people continued to serve in a variety of roles after the war. cases, the plane's massive weaponry was eliminated, but they remained effective as trainers' transports and communications vehicles. Many surplus Mitchells were purchased as private planes and converted into executive transports. The adaptable fundamental concept handled all of these jobs with ease. The story of the B-25 Mitchell is one of exceptional success. Its versatility saw it produced in staggering numbers, more than any other Allied twin-engine bomber, and its presence was felt in every corner of the global conflict. But beyond the battles and statistics, the Mitchell's true legacy lies in the bond it formed with its crews. It was known as a tough, responsive, and forgiving plane that brought its airmen home.